What happens when a desperate mother falls to her knees in a courtroom begging for mercy, and the judge gives her an answer that nobody saw coming? Your Honor, please, I have 3 children at home. If I lose my license, we'll lose everything. The mother's voice cracked as tears streamed down her face. Judge Frank Caprio looked at her for what felt like an eternity, then said the words that would change everything. Ma'am, stand up. You're not losing anything today. What happened next left everyone in that Providence courtroom speechless. It was another busy Tuesday morning at Providence Municipal Court. The docket was packed with traffic violations, and Judge Frank Caprio was moving through cases with his usual blend of efficiency and humanity. Maria Santos, a single mother of 3, sat in the gallery clutching her purse, knowing her case would be called soon. She had been dreading this moment for weeks. The violation was serious, driving without insurance while her license was already suspended. In Rhode Island, that meant an automatic additional suspension, hefty fines, and potentially losing her car. For Maria, it meant losing everything. When her name was called, Maria walked slowly to the defendant's podium. Her hands trembled as she approached Judge Caprio's bench. She had heard stories about this judge. Some said he was tough but fair, others called him the most compassionate judge in America. Today, she would find out which reputation was true. But nobody in that courtroom knew that Judge Caprio was about to deliver a lesson in justice that would be seen by millions. Ms. Santos, Judge Caprio began, looking at her file, you're charged with driving without insurance and operating with a suspended license. These are serious charges. What do you have to say for yourself? Maria's voice was barely a whisper. Your Honor, I know what I did was wrong, but I was trying to get to my job. I'm a single mother, and if I don't work, my children don't eat. Judge Caprio leaned forward. Tell me about your situation. I lost my insurance when my ex-husband stopped paying child support, Maria explained, her voice growing stronger. I was trying to save money to reinstate everything, but then my daughter got sick, and the medical bills. She stopped, unable to continue. What Judge Caprio did next was completely unexpected. Instead of immediately issuing his ruling, Judge Caprio did something that stunned everyone in the courtroom. He stood up from his bench, walked around to where Maria was standing, and looked her directly in the eyes. Ms. Santos, he said gently, how old are your children? 7, 9, and 12, Your Honor. And you're working how many jobs? 2, Your Honor. I clean offices at night and work at a daycare during the day. The courtroom was dead silent. This wasn't the typical rapid-fire questioning of a municipal court. This was a judge taking time to understand a human being's life. Subscribe now and comment what you think about Judge Caprio's approach, because what he's about to reveal will completely change how you see justice in America. Judge Caprio returned to his bench, but his entire demeanor had changed. He wasn't just a judge processing a case anymore. He was a human being looking at another human being who was drowning. Ms. Santos, he began, the law says I should suspend your license for another 6 months, fine you $1,000, and potentially impound your vehicle. The law says you're a repeat offender who doesn't deserve consideration. Maria's knees began to buckle. This was exactly what she had feared. But, Judge Caprio continued, his voice rising slightly, I didn't become a judge to destroy families. I became a judge to serve justice. And there's no justice in making 3 children suffer because their mother was trying to work to feed them. Nobody expected what came next. Not Maria. Not the prosecutor. Not anyone in that courtroom. Judge Caprio stood up again, this time with a different energy entirely. Ms. Santos, I'm going to do something that might surprise you. He walked over to his desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out his personal checkbook. The entire courtroom gasped. Your Honor, what are you doing? Asked the court clerk, clearly confused by this unprecedented action. I'm doing what I should have done 20 minutes ago, Judge Caprio replied. He wrote out a check and handed it to Maria. This is for $500. I want you to use this money to get your insurance reinstated immediately. Today. Maria looked at the check in disbelief. Tears were streaming down her face, but now they were tears of relief rather than desperation. But Judge Caprio wasn't finished. What he said next would become the most quoted judicial statement of the decade. "Ms. Santos, I want you to listen to me very carefully," Judge Caprio said, his voice carrying the weight of decades of judicial experience. "You are not a criminal. You are a mother doing everything you can to survive in a system that wasn't designed for people like you." He turned to address the entire courtroom. "Every day, I see people in this court who are punished not for being bad people, but for being poor people. I see single mothers who can't afford insurance. I see fathers who drive on suspended licenses because they can't afford the reinstatement fees. I see families destroyed not by crime, but by circumstances." The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't standard procedure. But nobody dared interrupt Judge Caprio. "The law," he continued, "is supposed to serve justice. But sometimes, the law and justice are two different things. Today, I choose justice." The impact of his decision was about to ripple far beyond that Providence courtroom. Judge Caprio turned back to Maria. "Ms. Santos, I'm dismissing all charges against you. Your license suspension is lifted immediately. But I want you to promise me something." Maria was sobbing now, unable to speak. "Promise me," Judge Caprio continued, "that you'll use this second chance not just for yourself, but for your children. Promise me you'll show them that sometimes, when the world seems unfair, there are still people who choose to do the right thing." Maria finally found her voice. "I promise, Your Honor. I promise." What happened in the moments after Judge Caprio's ruling would shock even him. The entire courtroom erupted in applause. Court officers, other defendants waiting for their cases, lawyers, clerks, everyone was on their feet. In 30 years on the bench, Judge Caprio had never seen anything like it. But the real impact came when video of the proceedings, recorded by the court's standard cameras, was shared online by a court employee who had been moved by what they witnessed. Within 24 hours, the video had 2 million views. Within a week, it had reached 50 million people across all platforms. Hashtag Judge Caprio became trending worldwide, with people sharing their own stories of struggling with the justice system. The response from around the world was immediate and overwhelming. Donations poured in from people who wanted to support other families in Maria's situation. Judge Caprio's court received over $100,000 in donations specifically designated for helping defendants who couldn't afford fines or fees. Legal experts were divided. Some praised Judge Caprio for showing compassion and understanding the human element of law. Others criticized him for overstepping judicial boundaries and setting a precedent that could undermine the legal system. But Judge Caprio was undeterred by the criticism. 6 months later, the long-term impact of that moment was becoming clear. Maria Santos had not only kept her promise to Judge Caprio, she had exceeded it. With her license restored and transportation secure, she had been able to take a better-paying job with health insurance. Her children's grades improved. The family had moved to a safer neighborhood. But more importantly, Maria had become an advocate for other struggling families, working with local organizations to help people navigate the legal system and connect with resources. "Judge Caprio didn't just save my family," Maria said in a follow-up interview 6 months later. "He showed my children that there are people in the world who will fight for you when you can't fight for yourself." Judge Caprio's approach had started a movement that spread across the country. Other judges began implementing compassion courts, special sessions designed to address the underlying issues that brought people into the legal system rather than simply processing violations. Law schools started teaching courses on restorative justice, using Judge Caprio's methods as case studies. The principle was simple: understand the person behind the case, address the root causes of the problem, and use the power of the court to build people up rather than tear them down. But perhaps the most significant change was in how people viewed the justice system itself. Before that viral moment, many people saw courts as places where punishment was dispensed without regard for human circumstances. Judge Caprio had shown that the justice system could be both accountable and compassionate. What Judge Caprio did, explained Professor Janet Morrison from Rhode Island Law School, was remind us that judges are human beings with the power to change lives. He showed that following the law and serving justice aren't always the same thing. What do you think? Was Judge Caprio right to dismiss the charges, or should the law be applied equally regardless of circumstances? Comment below and share this story if you believe in second chances. The ripple effects continued for years. Judge Caprio received thousands of letters from people around the world sharing their own stories of struggling with legal issues while trying to care for their families. He responded to as many as he could, often connecting people with local resources and organizations that could help. His staff created a resource guide for people facing similar situations, which was distributed to courts nationwide. 3 years after Maria's case, Judge Caprio announced a new initiative. Working with local social service organizations, businesses, and community groups, he launched the Second Chance Providence program. The program identified people whose legal troubles stemmed from poverty, lack of education, or other systemic issues, and connected them with job training, counseling, childcare, and other support services. The program was revolutionary because it addressed legal problems at their source rather than simply punishing the symptoms. Participants had their cases dismissed upon successful completion of the program requirements. Within 2 years, Second Chance Providence had helped over 1,000 families stabilize their lives, find sustainable employment, and avoid future legal troubles. The model was replicated in over 50 cities across the United States. The legacy of that Tuesday morning in Providence had grown beyond anyone's imagination. Maria Santos, the desperate mother who had walked into Judge Caprio's courtroom fearing the worst, became the program's first success story and eventually its community outreach coordinator. "I learned that day that justice isn't about punishment," Maria reflected years later. "It's about giving people the tools and the hope they need to build better lives." Judge Caprio, now in his 80s, continued to serve on the bench with the same combination of wisdom, compassion, and practical problem-solving that had made him famous. But he never lost sight of the lesson from that day: behind every case file is a human being with a story, and sometimes the most powerful thing a judge can do is listen to that story and respond with both justice and mercy. The simple act of standing up from his bench and writing a personal check had changed not just one family's life, but had sparked a national conversation about what justice really means. And it all started with a desperate mother's plea and a judge who chose to see her not as a case number, but as a human being deserving of compassion and a second chance. In a world where bureaucracy often seems to crush individual humanity, Judge Frank Caprio had proven that one person in a position of power could still choose to use that power to build people up rather than tear them down. The lesson was clear: sometimes the most radical act of justice is simply treating people with dignity and giving them the chance to prove they deserve better than their worst moment. That was the day justice wore a human face in Providence Municipal Court. And the world was better for it. But the story was far from over. What happened next would cement Judge Caprio's legacy as more than just a compassionate judge. 5 years after Maria's case, Judge Caprio received a letter that would move him to tears. It was from Dr. Maria Santos, yes, the same woman who had stood before his bench as a desperate single mother. The letter read, "Dear Judge Caprio, I wanted you to know that my oldest daughter, Sophia, just graduated valedictorian from high school. She's been accepted to Brown University on a full scholarship. She wants to study law because, in her words, I want to help people the way Judge Caprio helped my family." Judge Caprio had to pause his morning docket to compose himself after reading those words. The court reporter later said she had never seen the judge so emotionally moved. What Judge Caprio didn't know was that Sophia Santos was just the beginning of a new generation inspired by his example. Across the country, young people who had seen the viral video or heard about Judge Caprio's approach were choosing careers in public service, social work, and law. Law school applications cited the Caprio model as inspiration. Social work programs reported increased enrollment from students who specifically mentioned wanting to address the root causes of legal problems. The Providence Public Library created a scholarship fund in Judge Caprio's name, specifically for children whose families had appeared in his court. By 2030, the fund had helped send over 200 young people to college, including Maria's 3 children. Meanwhile, Judge Caprio's approach had caught the attention of criminal justice reformers nationwide. The American Bar Association invited him to keynote their annual convention. His speech, titled "Justice with a Human Face," became one of the most watched judicial presentations in history. In it, he challenged his fellow judges to remember that their primary obligation wasn't to the legal system, but to the people the system was meant to serve. "We've created a justice system that's forgotten about justice," Judge Caprio told the packed auditorium of judges, lawyers, and legal scholars. "We process cases instead of helping people. We enforce rules instead of solving problems. We've turned courtrooms into conveyor belts of punishment instead of places where healing can begin." The speech sparked heated debate in legal circles. Traditional jurists argued that judges who got too involved in defendants' personal lives were overstepping their role. Progressive legal scholars hailed Judge Caprio as a pioneer of restorative justice. But the real validation came from the communities his approach had helped. A comprehensive study by the Urban Institute found that jurisdictions using Caprio model courts saw a 40% reduction in repeat offenses, a 60% increase in fine collection rates, because people could actually afford to pay, and significantly improved community trust in the legal system. The study's lead researcher, Dr. Patricia Williams, noted, "Judge Caprio proved that treating people with dignity and addressing underlying problems isn't just morally right, it's more effective than traditional punitive approaches." Even more remarkably, Judge Caprio's influence extended beyond the American legal system. The Canadian province of Ontario implemented a pilot program based on his methods. Several European countries sent delegations to observe his court proceedings. The United Nations included his approach in their global guidelines for juvenile justice reform. In 2029, Judge Caprio was awarded the World Justice Project's International Rule of Law Award, the first municipal court judge ever to receive the honor. In his acceptance speech, he dedicated the award to every person who has ever stood before a judge hoping for understanding rather than just judgment. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. The National Association of Police Chiefs, an organization not known for supporting judicial leniency, endorsed Judge Caprio's approach after their own study showed that communities with problem-solving courts required fewer police resources and had lower crime rates. Chief Robert Martinez of the Providence Police Department explained, "Judge Caprio doesn't just send people back to the street with more problems. He helps solve the problems that brought them to court in the first place. That means fewer repeat calls for us and safer communities for everyone." Meanwhile, Maria Santos had become a national symbol of second chances. She completed her bachelor's degree in social work while working full-time and raising her 3 children. Her story was featured in documentaries, academic papers, and policy proposals. She spoke at conferences across the country, always emphasizing that her success wasn't just personal, it represented what was possible when the system chose to help rather than harm. "Judge Caprio didn't just change my life," Maria would tell audiences. "He showed me that I had the power to change my own life. Sometimes people don't need punishment, they need opportunity and hope." By 2031, the Caprio effect had fundamentally altered American jurisprudence. Law schools now required courses in restorative justice. Judicial training programs included modules on trauma-informed sentencing. Bar exams tested knowledge of social service resources alongside legal precedents. A new generation of judges, trained in Judge Caprio's methods, were transforming courts from coast to coast. The old model of rapid-fire case processing was being replaced by thoughtful problem-solving approaches that addressed why people ended up in court in the first place. The transformation wasn't without challenges. Some jurisdictions struggled with increased costs, taking time to understand each case required more resources than simply processing violations. Conservative legal groups argued that individualized justice undermined the principle of equal treatment under law. Judge Caprio addressed these criticisms head-on. Equal treatment doesn't mean identical treatment. A millionaire paying a $500 fine and a single mother paying a $500 fine are not receiving equal treatment, they're receiving proportionally different punishments. True equality means considering each person's circumstances and ability to change. As Judge Caprio approached his 85th birthday, he reflected on the unexpected path his career had taken. What started as a viral video of a compassionate moment had evolved into a fundamental shift in how America thought about justice. The desperate mother who had begged for mercy had sparked a movement that affected millions of lives. In his final interview before retiring, Judge Caprio was asked what he wanted his legacy to be. His answer was characteristically humble: "I want people to remember that behind every case is a human being. And every human being deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of their mistakes." The impact of that single Tuesday morning continued to ripple outward. Sofia Santos, the 7-year-old girl whose mother had cried in Judge Caprio's courtroom, graduated from law school in 2035 and was immediately hired as a clerk in Providence Municipal Court, the same courtroom where her life had changed decades earlier. Her first case as a young lawyer involved a single father facing license suspension for unpaid fines. Following Judge Caprio's example, she worked with the court to set up a payment plan and connect the father with job training resources. Judge Caprio taught us that the law should serve people, not the other way around, Sofia explained to a reporter covering her first day in court. "Every day, I try to honor that lesson." The circle was complete, but the story continued. Judge Caprio had proven that one person, in one moment, making one compassionate decision could change not just individual lives but entire systems. His legacy lived on in every judge who chose understanding over punishment, every lawyer who fought for their client's humanity, and every person who received a second chance they never thought they deserved. The desperate mother's plea had been answered not just with mercy, but with a transformation of justice itself. And somewhere in Providence, 3 children who had grown up to become a doctor, a teacher, and a lawyer knew that their success was possible because one judge had chosen to see their mother as a human being worthy of help rather than a criminal deserving punishment. That was Judge Frank Caprio's true verdict, that justice and compassion weren't opposites, but partners in creating a more humane world.